Hello, everybody. So welcome to our program today. Today we are talking about crisis management. So creating a safe and supportive environment for the individual and the work. And today we have our special guest speakers. We have Katrina Rouan and we have Matt Wisotsky. And the two of them together, Katrina has been the Wayne State University Library System Coordinator for Reference Services since 2014. And Matt has been the Director of Classroom Support and Design at Wayne State University as well. So I'll let them take away and we'll go from there.
So hi, everybody, and welcome to our presentation. Thank you, DJ, and for that awesome introduction. Thanks, Steve, for reaching out and having us. Thanks for attending our presentation on crisis management, creating a safe and supportive environment for the individual and the work. As DJ mentioned, my name is Matt Wisotsky. I'm the Director of Classroom Technology Support here at Wayne State University. Prior to this, I had about 20 years or so of experience in libraries, both from a student assistant perspective and then worked my way up to a leadership role. And I have the great pleasure of co-hosting with my good friend and colleague, Katrina. Katrina?
Hi, everybody. I'm Katrina Rouan, and I am, as DJ mentioned, I'm the coordinator for reference services here at Wayne State University Libraries. I also supervise and coordinate our graduate student assistant program of 8 graduate student assistants, and I'm really happy to be speaking with you all today.
So I'm in control of the screen sharing, so it might get a little clunky here and there, so sorry about that. But I am going to, as we mentioned, as people were entering in, there is a little bit of an engagement component to this presentation. And so we are doing a quick icebreaker with Padlet. The link is both in chat as well as on this opening slide, but I am going to kick the screen share over to the Padlet screen share so you all can read these great responses about a work challenge that came up this week. Big or small, doesn't really matter. Just want to kind of let everybody know that we're all on an equal playing field here. We're all having our own defined crises that we're dealing with, big or small, and just wanted you all to kind of give these a little glance over to see who you're in the room with and what we're sharing.
I don't know how to access it.
I think
there's links.
Yeah, it won't let me access it anymore because I already
did it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna restart my.
Okay.
We'll give you a couple minutes here, 1 or 2 minutes, just to kind of finish up submitting any responses you feel like sharing. They are anonymous, so you can get as personal as you feel and don't feel as though any identity is going to be revealed here.
I have to say, as I was glancing through some of these, I was wondering how many of my coworkers were in this workshop, because a lot sounds very familiar. So I think that kind of just reminds me too that a lot of our experiences are the same or similar as we go throughout our days in libraries.
We'll give it 1 more minute, just as the last few people, I keep seeing the pop-ups of people that are joining us. I just want to give everybody an opportunity to participate if they feel like sharing, and then also just kind of reading some of the responses. There are little heart icons that I believe you can click on if you want to say, yeah, I'm right there with you. That's something that I'm dealing with. You can also add a comment as well. But again, just a quick icebreaker just to kind of get a sense of who's in the room and how we're defining our own personal crises. I'm sorry if you're seeing these Padlet notifications popping up. I thought I turned everything off, but you may see those popping up on those notices.
I think that's just you, Matt.
Oh, perfect. That's great. And we'll make this information, like this link, I know this session is being recorded, but these links will stay live for a while and all this data that we're gathering. So if you ever feel like revisiting those that were in this room with you and what we were all dealing with, this will be here for you to review and enjoy. All right, you ready to go, Katrina?
Ready.
All right, so let me just get clunky again here for a second. Go back to this. Everybody see the presentation? We're back. Okay, cool.
Yes.
So thanks for your participation in that quick icebreaker. Welcome everybody to the presentation. Before we get started too deep into the presentation, we did want to offer up these kind of rules of engagement just to promote a safe space that we're all in. Crisis is a big topic and it can have different weight depending on how you define it. So this presentation will use personal and professional scenarios to help facilitate discussions that allow vulnerabilities to be recognized, strengths to be found, and steps forward to creating strong networks of support. And so just kind of review these bullets right here. Pretty common practice when you're in these group sessions. Just make sure that we're being respectful for everybody. Everyone's voice counts, and we should just encourage as much dialogue as possible. And let's have a really good session where when we leave here, we feel like we got the most out of it.
Okay, so I think when we think of the word crisis, we, I don't know about anyone else here, but I immediately jump to a lot of like these world news headlines. I think about earthquakes and wars and the pandemic. But for the purposes of today's presentation, we're going to focus on crisis with this definition. So an acute emotional upset arising from situational, developmental, or social sources that result in some temporary inability to cope with one's usual, problem-solving skills that they have. And so, again, while we think big scale, I want to just point out that most commonly crises are being, are happening at a more individual level. And while these may seem small when we compare them to something like COVID or what's happening in Ukraine, for that individual, these are not necessarily small things, right? These things can have very huge impact on their lives. Another thing that just we want to kind of keep in mind too is that crisis presents what we call both danger and opportunity. So there is danger in that a person is just like incapable of handling whatever is happening. There's that paralyzation sort of that can happen with the crisis, but opportunity in that working through the crisis and coming out of it, there is a way to develop maybe new skills, priorities can be reassessed. And so there is, we like to kind of think that there's a bit of maybe a silver lining there as well. And then crisis management, we're talking about just that process of working through a crisis to its endpoint where there is a resolution. So not that these things continue on and on and on without ever seeing some sort of final agreement of some sort where like we've worked our way through it and then we can move past to something else that might come up, hopefully not too soon.
So we wanted to kind of give you an overview of what our institution dealt with over the past couple of years. Maybe you'll see some similarities in your own institution. Maybe you'll see some similarities in yourself in these. And again, this is just to continue to build off of that, creating this commonality between, the room that you're sharing right now and the people that you're sharing this experience with. And hopefully you feel a sense that you're not alone in the things that you're dealing with. And so, as we all dealt with when this presentation was created, a lot of it was founded on coming out of, if you will, a global pandemic. But aside from the global pandemic and something as large as that, recognizing that crises can be as small as a, car not starting, or, your kid is heading out the door and trips and falls, scrapes their knee, and it completely throws away everything that you had planned for that day. And so big or small, crises do exist. And we wanted to just give you some sense of what our institution had to deal with over the past 3 years. So concerns about personal safety. And again, this is our own health as an individual, but then the health of our colleagues and the health of our families. Our world, as much as it got smaller during the pandemic, it also, our awareness of people and their needs grew exponentially, because it wasn't just about the day-to-day, what we were experiencing. It was, how am I going to take care of this person? How am I taking my colleagues' health into consideration? How am I taking the staff and patrons that we support into consideration. And so concerns about the personal safety is understanding, our own needs as well as the needs of other, and incorporating that into how we are delivering service. So for that bullet 2, tying into that, balance the safety concerns with the need to deliver service. You watch the news and you see all of these essential staff that have to still go to work every single day. And we were involved in library work, and a lot of our library staff had to go to work every single day still. Our lives didn't stop. We just had to change the way we were delivering service in a safer way. And so, at Wayne State, we had created a reservation system that, allowed our computers or our study desks to be socially distanced so that students could still come in, make their reservations, recognizing that there was equity issues where some students really relied on that technology to still be available, or their books to still be available to them. How are we going to deliver that service while still maintaining that safe environment for them as well as the library staff? So the reservation system, I was also working with the ILL department that did an amazing job with, scanning materials and turning them over and getting them out to people, in a timely manner, again, in a time when everybody was like, what are we supposed to do and how are we supposed to maintain? What this also did, though, is, and the third challenge that we faced was these equity opportunities throughout the institution. Some library colleagues were able to justify and support a 100% remote work environment, which was great. That was very good for them to be able to do. There was no disruption of service. They were still able to provide consultations and reference services and everything in between. But then you had certain staff, such as, my access services staff that I was overseeing. We deal with the materials, the print materials that have to go out and be physically handled. We deal with the patrons that need to, come into our buildings still, and they could not justify a remote work environment. And that really stung a little bit. You could start seeing some fractures within our system that was making it more difficult for our own staff to feel like they were being treated fairly, let alone, the equity issues that we were dealing with and trying to support for our students. So those 3 challenges were really eye-opening, and they really, again, I know a lot of that was, all encompassing and kind of focused on the pandemic response. But again, then somebody that called in because they had just the sniffles, or again, their car didn't start, those day-to-day issues that we used to just take for granted as like, okay, well, I guess you won't be here today, was so much larger now because our world was changing, and the way that we were responding to those crises, whether big or small, were changing. So these challenges brought forward a lot of questions and a lot of conversations that we had kind of put on the front burner, put on the back burner, back and forth, about work silos, about shared work knowledge, about job shadowing programs, to try to elevate everybody's skill set into a common, practice where everybody could kind of help everybody and participate. And that also addressed, again, when people were working at home, that takes away from your on-site workforce. How are you filling those gaps of those physical presences? So by doing that and by having those shared responsibilities, it really did kind of level the playing field a little bit. And as we move out of the pandemic and we hopefully remember those, the big and small crises, it doesn't stop. Katrina alluded to it before about Ukraine and the things that are on the news now. Like, these are still very intense things that are happening in our world that are impacting us all as individuals. And it does impact and needs to be addressed from a colleague to colleague to an institution to staff environment to really make us feel safe. So that was a lot of text, and so I'm going to speed through these now and try to give you some visuals. So historically, leadership within the institution would view the library in this way, like the library as the building. And that was their first concern. How can we keep the building open and running smoothly? And then they think about the services within the building. So circulation, references, all the technology, the study spaces. We're starting with the building, we're moving to the service, and then last but not least, you think about the people. And so in order to actually flip that on its head and identify the crises that the individual is going through, you reverse engineer that. And so leadership over the past couple of years has had to flip that library to service to people and instead do people to service to library. I love it. I think it's exactly how it should always be. And unfortunately, sometimes it takes, a bigger crisis to make us reevaluate. So when you recognize first the people that work in the library and what their personal needs are and how they contribute to the services that the library provides, it secures that positive campus reputation that the library can have on the entire institution. But more importantly, it focuses on the people that are doing the work and the individuals that are doing it. It's that recognition of each individual that helps us to maintain that overall production of service while still taking care of the person. As leaders and as colleagues, we all bear that responsibility to be positive allies to those that we work with, to recognize the needs people carry with them, and more importantly, help them find out the solutions. Again, it could be a just listening, and that goes a long way, or maybe they're actually wanting to talk to you to say, hey, what can we do to try to what can I do? What can we do to try to solve this? And it's creating that power in numbers in terms of your network, which we'll talk about later. So that was from an institution level that we both wanted to give you kind of an overview of those challenges. But again, to make this a little bit more personal, Katrina and I also wanted to break down and give you a personal share of impacts that we've had by making those individual connections with people, how it's changed us, how it's changed the individual, and how it's changed us as leaders going forward. So I have the great fortune of overseeing a good both full and part-time staff. And so my favorite people to work with are the student assistants. Many of those students I'm very fortunate, they start as year one, and if I do my job right and we're giving them a nice stimulating work environment and we're supporting their academic journey, they usually stick through graduation. It's awesome to be part of that process. And I do a pretty good job, I think. I'll give myself a little pat on the back, why not, of doing some check-ins with them, every day, address them by name, make sure that I see how they're doing and how their classes are going, and is work killing them? Because more importantly, we got to make sure that their grades are staying up, because if their grades fail or fall, maybe they lose their job, maybe they don't want to be here anymore, and I don't want any of that. So I do a lot of good personal check-ins on their academic journey and their professional journey. Where I struggle and where I have struggled is actually seeing how they're doing as people. We move so quickly because we got to go to point A, point B, point C, that sometimes we forget to pause and we ask them real quick, hey, how you doing? And we're already walking past them before they go, actually, I'm really bad. And you're, oh, okay, good. And you're like, wait a minute, like it doesn't even connect with you what they said. And so I lack that. And it wasn't until, again, sometimes it takes a large tragedy to really slow things down and make you reassess. Able to support African-American student assistant body that I have after the death of George Floyd. And, these students were having a shared sense of fear, anger, isolation. They didn't really know what to do. And me as a white male in a leadership role really needed to understand that, yes, I could have an impact as a leader, but more importantly, I needed to let them drive the conversation. I needed to be that ear for them and then share their frustration, have the meetings to, close doors so if they wanted to scream and yell, they could. Or if they needed me to leave because they just needed a closed door to be able to go behind and just reset themselves. It really rocked me, this experience, and trying to be both empathetic and sympathetic to them, but letting them drive. And I didn't know if I was really doing a good job at this until I saw this post on Charlo, that's the student's name, her social media account, where she actually addressed what I had done in that moment and how it had helped her and how she felt supported and that she could keep fighting her fight. It really went a long way for me, and it changed my understanding of what I need to do as a leader. Again, not just in these grand gestures of in these grand tragedies, but again, if Charlo came up to me and said, you know what, my car died, I should take that with as much weight feeling her frustration and really, coaching her through it and being that ear and being the leader that I should be, and connecting with each and every person on an individual level, and not just as you're my worker or you're my colleague.
Okay, thanks, Matt. My personal share is just going to be a little bit different, a little more anonymous than Matt's was. I just smile every time I see this slide because it's a little bit of a throwback picture of me and some of the graduate students that I worked with. This is taking it back several years. But when I was thinking about how I've been able to, in my role, really find ways to connect and support people I was working with, this team is the team that came up for me as like kind of the first option. And so I've been working with these graduate students for 8 years, 9 years now. They rotate all the time, right? As they become new professionals out there in libraries. It's a lot of fun. But with this, and if we all think back to maybe our time in graduate school, I think there just naturally comes, different crises that happen. And I've had, the privilege of working with this team through some really happy times and some really challenging times. And the story I want to share today just happens to be one around like a graduation crisis for a student. And in this example, I just had a regular check-in meeting with one of the graduate students I supervise, and they kind of just dropped a bomb on me and said, "Hey, I'm not going to pass one of my classes this semester, and I won't be able to continue." And they were about halfway through their time as a grad assistant with me, so about halfway through their library school program. And this really threw me. Like this student had been very high performing, had been I think universally like really well liked. My colleagues loved working with them. And, I kind of spent some time really like in that meeting. We had some dialogue where I could understand hopefully a little bit more about what really happened. And it seemed to me like this person just had stopped participating in their classes. I think they kind of lost their drive. They weren't completing assignments. And just there was a lack of engagement that was taking place. Really, really out of character. And clearly the student was full into crisis, right? Like there's just, they were so far in it. It was almost one of those situations where I wasn't sure what I could do. But I did ask questions and really tried to ascertain, like, is this something that you want to, do you really want to do this? Do you want to finish the program? Do you want to become a librarian? And they did. And so I really worked with them on like, okay, well, let's plan, here's a step we can take. Let's get in touch with people through the School of Information Sciences and identify what your options are. And even like through some emails, I was able to advocate pretty heavily for that student and work with them to find, other options that they could do, being some solutions for a path forward. Ultimately, this story doesn't have a happy ending in terms of that student being able to continue in the program. But I do think that when I look back now, this has really taught me a lot about opportunities to continue to have these types of conversations with staff that I work with. And really, it's just made me a lot more aware of the tools and trying to kind of help students who, maybe just aren't, they're gonna hit like a struggle point, but perhaps like we're gonna be able to work through that sooner. And so I'm still hoping that maybe they'll continue to work on their educational goals and maybe find their way back to libraries. So obviously I'm keeping that all very anonymous, but I did want to just share a little bit about this team, and that kind of gives you an understanding of where like my hat is when it comes to my leadership in libraries and my role. Thanks, Matt. So from what you've just heard from Matt and me, I think you probably have an idea that we consider ourselves very people-focused leaders. And this is just something that I think we were both naturally drawn to as individuals. And then it's been great because we got to work together for many years and kind of continue to support each other as this. And so what does it mean to be a people-focused leader? These things here are, I'll just kind of take you through and talk about. These are the things that I think just are everyday practices you can do to be people-focused. And the first thing you can do is just show up. So being present and all of that. As Matt kind of went through before, we've had some interesting abilities to work remotely, but if you are working with a team where a good number of people are showing up, it does pay to like kind of show up as well in person if you can safely do so, to continue to sort of build those connections and just increase like your accessibility. And so I find that like that's something that I've been able to do pretty easily. And again, like making sure we're being careful with our own personal health too. The next thing you can do is just to know your team. Know who these people are, know their names, learn about them. I'm not advocating that you be overly personal or inappropriate with your team, or ask really pointed questions. But if you are present and as you work with individuals over time, you are going to build up a rapport, and you're going to start to know who they are as people and make some connections. And if you're doing these first two things, this next thing should come pretty naturally, and that is recognition. Recognition is incredibly important, and putting into practice and just being very mindful of recognizing individuals as they as they accomplish things, as they're successful in some of their work endeavors, is an incredibly really good thing that you can do as a people-focused leader. And it's also really important that you do this more frequently and not just save it for an annual review or a quarterly review. It makes a big difference if you're recognizing people more in real time for the things that they are doing. And then finally, there's another thing that you could do too, which is to be inclusive in your decision making. And this is something that I personally struggle with a lot. I tend to be a person who feels really comfortable making decisions, and I will have a lot of backup plans in place right away. And so I don't always, I should say in the past, I haven't always felt the need to bring a team of people together and like talk through it more. I've just kind of made decisions and run with it. And I've learned though in more recent years that it really has paid to slow it down a little bit more if I'm able to bring more people to that table, have those discussions, allow them to participate in that decision making and move forward with that. And these are all things too, I should point out that while I'm talking about this from like a very leadership standpoint, these are all things that you can do or advocate for doing or set an example of doing, no matter what your role is in the library. You don't have to be a leader to do these things. You really could just be any other, team member or participant in a group. You can start modeling these behaviors, and hopefully maybe they'll catch on if they're not already present in your library system. So that's people-focused leadership in like the everyday. When things are going well. If you're doing everything there on the left, it's going to make when there's these times of crises or storm a lot easier to handle. And things you can do as putting people first in your institution during those times of crises is starting with like keeping change to a minimum. There is going to be change, okay? Like I'm not saying don't change a thing. That's ridiculous. But just being really mindful and flexible of what those changes need to be and prioritizing them in a way so that it's not, you're not making decisions to, change your catalog system when, all of a sudden like a bunch of team members have had personal individual crises or something. Like be flexible with the timeline. And just recognize that whatever you can do to keep things as normal as possible can really help without, again, being in denial. Communication is a really huge component of this as well. So recognize that the effects of a certain crisis are potentially a lot bigger than you're thinking they are. Okay. These things can spread out to peripheral groups, even though you don't think that they would. And so communicating what's happening and potential changes, and just making sure that everybody has the opportunity to understand and know what's going on is really a good way to go. I don't think that you can, I think that sometimes there's like this hesitation, because a lot of crises, as we have kind of shared throughout this, and even what I saw in the Padlet earlier, can be very like individual personal crises. And yes, like it's not really appropriate to be sending emails, sharing what's going on. But if a person is going to need to step away from work for a certain period of time, it is very important that people know that that's happening. They don't need to know why, they just need to understand, okay, this is going to happen, and then what's going to happen because of that. And I think that I know I've been an employee in organizations that have really struggled with that kind of communication. So putting that as a big focus too during times of crises is important. And then finally, taking care of yourself is a really important people-focused leadership trait that you should be like embracing if possible. We talked about this a lot, throughout COVID. And I think that just in general, everyone's a little bit more into taking care of themselves and recognizing that that is an important component to everybody's, health. And so, I'm not going to spend too much time on that. But again, these are some great things just to kind of keep in mind when there are times of crises, and how you can think about putting those people in your organization first.
So building off of what Katrina shared about the importance of taking care of yourself, we did want to acknowledge that we know just how difficult that can be. We're wired through our ambitions, through our fears, through outside influences, to just keep pushing, push, and get everything done. Because if we don't, who knows what opportunity we're going to miss, or are we going to be left behind? And that hurts. That's hard to go, okay, I'm going to put myself first and my health first before getting my things done, because I don't want to miss out on the opportunity. As a result, we feel vulnerable to take time for ourselves. And I relate this professional vulnerability to a concept called imposter syndrome, which is the persistent inability to believe that one's success is deserved or has been legitimately achieved as a result of one's own effort or skills. I have found myself in plenty of rooms where I go, I don't belong here. And it's because I feel either intimidated or shut out, and it's hard to come out of. And so the goal here through this presentation, hope, and by developing these kind of like common check-in practices and taking care of ourselves, is that as institutions continue to put the human first instead of the work, an individual can hopefully feel more confident in their vulnerabilities and view them as a way to personally and professionally grow and show how they can shine in the institution instead of feeling kind of shuttered and sheltered as a result of those vulnerabilities. So we are kind of pushing time. I think we're doing okay, but we're going to do another quick group share based on things that we talked about already. And we just wanted to kind of do a quick temperature check just to see if the past 30 minutes is resonating in people's minds and how you're feeling, and do a quick Padlet share on these prompts here. And I'm going to share my screen so that we can start seeing as people are populating. We'll take 1 or 2 minutes just to kind of populate this.
I dropped the link in the chat as well.
Thank you. And the little alien avatars are populating on the top of that Padlet, showing that people are engaging. So this is exciting.
I'm already liking what we're seeing so far. Seeing some themes of getting to know other people in the organization more. And I know personally, like for me, we had a lot of changeover during COVID. And of course, the Wayne State Libraries have a lot of staff and employees. And so it's like making those connections and kind of starting over from scratch has been really like a big thing that we've needed to work on.
And I'm seeing a comment in the chat from Robert. We have instituted an employee connection committee that encourages interaction and input. I like the concept. I really like the title. I think that's really cool. Employee connection committee. That's great.
We had something kind of like that back a few years ago before COVID even, I think, or was it was kind of during COVID too.
So thank you all for participating in this Padlet. I know that a couple more responses are coming in. I'm gonna
and this will stay live, so you can revisit.
Exactly. So I'm just gonna kick back over to the presentation here and take it away, Katrina.
Okay. And I am, Matt, just so you know, I'm aware of time, and I think I think we'll be okay. I think we'll probably skip going into breakout rooms. So okay, so returning back to that original definition of crisis that I spoke about earlier, this impedes a person's ability to problem solve. And with that comes, making the ability to make a decision and come up with a course of action. And without that, we talk about that paralysis and they're really, they're clearly going to need some help here. And this is where something called decision counseling can come into play. Decision counseling is a dialogue that you can have with someone just to sort of help facilitate their decision-making process, kind of help them organize their understanding of what's going on, break down that crisis into smaller parts and kind of plan action for those parts. This is not making decisions for other people. Just want to be really, really clear about that. This is one of those opportunities to employ some active listening and maybe set benchmarks and even maybe make some notes for somebody who, again, if they're having a crisis, they may not be able to, they may just need someone to help do things like make some notes of the conversation and give them to them so that they can kind of remember what's been talked about. And these questions here are just some ways to kind of guide that. They're very, very simple, basic questions. But again, it's about helping that person think about this crisis in this much more, smaller parts and figuring out what can be done. And, who can be involved, when do we need to do this by, that kind of thing. This should really be done in a very collaborative way with the individual and just kind of recognizing their network. So it's not something that, again, the idea here would be to support this person and really help them along, recognizing that they're going to have to do some of that on their own, but also making sure that they remember that they have a network at work, right? They have people around who can help and participate in this as well. And this should be done in a way that's appropriate to the situation. It needs to be very realistic with what is possible. And like, for example, if a person, is literally unavailable to have this talk, like that's part of it, maybe that's not even one of the possibilities for you. But the other thing too is just make sure that whatever plans of action you're coming up with are flexible enough to be reworked if the crisis evolves in some way. But they also need to be, specific enough too, so that that person can help, like, actually take some action. And so follow-up is a big part of this too. Like, I think if you have the ability to have a regular check-in and continue to kind of be there as a person to help facilitate through the crisis, that is a really valuable thing you can do. So we wanted to give everybody a chance to sort of practice some of what we've been talking about here through a group activity called Wise Crowds. And I think we're going to just kind of skip, just for our management of time here. I was going to have everyone go into breakout rooms, and I think I'm going to skip that part. And so what I have here is we have a scenario about a woman, Jane. And so I'll just read this very briefly. Jane's mother unexpectedly passed away and was the primary childcare provider for Jane's child. Jane is an access services manager that's responsible for opening the library and providing oversight for morning operations. Let's see if our wise crowd, or this group, can help Jane, her supervisor Bill, and her colleague Sam support Jane's crisis while maintaining the operation. And so what we have for you is we do have some more information about this scenario. I'm going to drop a link in the chat. And you may have noticed that we do have another Padlet here. We were going to put you into groups so that you could kind of discuss each of the different people in this scenario. But that link I just provided gives you more details about Jane, Bill, and Sam. And if you could take a look at that and just think about what are some of the things that you could do or how you might approach this. And what we have as well then is our third, and I promise it's the final Padlet, is going to give you an opportunity to kind of share some of your wisdom with how you could work with Jane, Bill, and or Sam. And there should be, I'm hoping it makes sense when you go into the Padlet that there's columns with the name of those folks at each of the top of the columns where you could provide some comments and some feedback. But I want to just give everybody, let's say 7 minutes to maybe take a look at those scenarios and contribute to the Padlet. And then we will talk about this a little bit more as a group.
And I will share. Do you want me to share the Padlet screen right now, Katrina, so that people can start populating and seeing it?
Yeah.
So we're going to share the Padlet screen. That screen also does have the scenario that was covered on that slide and a link to the PDF if you choose to read it. But yeah, give it a quick glance over and we'll come back in 7 minutes. I will say too, while people are reading through, if anybody wants to unmute and just throw things out, you don't have to necessarily document it in Padlet. So, but if not, just enjoy the silence and type away. I'm really liking the recommendations in Jane's column about, communication being like so important to get everybody aligned, to get an understanding of need, shared resources. It's really good stuff. And I really like that recommendation for Sam, considering what's on their plate first. That's really important to do that personal check-in first before we push ourselves over capacity just for the sake of, thinking that we are the only ones to help. It's really good.
I like the idea of kind of leveraging the network of, are there other parents, or even I was thinking other people that have had similar, had a close family member pass away or something, and that could, also just provide some support and assistance or their own tips.
I like this one under Bill's column about, does Bill know that he will be fully supported in supporting Jane? It's so important from a leadership perspective to really let the colleagues know, like, we understand that you're taking on additional responsibilities right now that might adjust your ability to get your own work done, but it's recognized, and don't worry, your support. It's really critical in making sure that everybody, not just the person that's dealing with the crisis directly, you're creating a shared experience of that crisis, which is really important, because then you're creating a more well-rounded support for everybody. Okay, how about 2 more minutes, Katrina? Sound good?
That looks good to me. Yep.
Maybe the next time we do this, we'll get our timings right to where we can actually do breakout rooms. I feel good about the next time. But this always works. It's great. All right. So while you're all finishing up and typing in your last great comments, again, this will be live. Feel free to revisit it. Feel free to continue to add to it. I'm going to come back to our presentation. We're going to wrap this up. And you already have seen it, I hope, with being in these various Padlet groups. And then obviously, as we've communicated here, but over this presentation, we've defined crises and the importance of separating the individual from our work. And a great tool that me and Katrina feel, and if you haven't picked up on it, that you can personally use to address these crises are your network and the power of your network. Networking is the cultivating of mutually beneficial give and take win-win relationships. It benefit everyone, regardless of the position you're in, your status in the organization, full-time, part-time, doesn't matter. There's a real true power in numbers, and in when you have a group of people with you on this journey, whether it's personal or professional, you don't feel so isolated, and you feel like you can kind of take on the world. So network can help people feel secure in their vulnerabilities, provide important resources to achieve personal and professional success, and ensure that the institution at large, which we do still have to, take that into consideration, can succeed during any form of crisis. We do strongly encourage you to build your network even before the crises even happens. Like, you can just start meeting people, start getting in their circles, start expanding your circle. And don't just wait for the emergency to happen, because how great would it be for something to come up and you already know, because you know people and you know what they're going through and their experiences, you can just go to them and say, hey, guess what? I know you dealt with this a couple of years back or yesterday. It happened to me, so let's go and chat about it. When we presented on this a couple months back in person, we had done a quick exercise where we handed out little note cards and envelopes to everybody that was in the room. We had them fill out a quick note of like affirmation, positive affirmation, completely random, and just seal it up and give it to a stranger in the room as you're leaving. And all that did was show the impact that you can have on an individual by just acknowledging that they exist and giving them something positive to reflect on if they needed some assistance getting through something. And it just really kind of puts into perspective that it doesn't take much. It's very simple gestures, does not have to be anything grandiose for your network to exist and feel like it's the most powerful resource that you have to take on anything. So please, 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 if you walk away with anything, we strongly encourage you to really pay attention to the people that are in your lives, how they can impact you as an individual, you as the institution, and just be good to everybody and be a part of their lives. And I think we'll be all right. So that's it. You did it. We did it.
If anybody has any questions or comments they want to share, we can take a look at the chat, or if they want to unmute. I don't know what your typical culture is for these sorts of workshops, but Matt and I are happy to answer questions or clarify anything that you heard today.
Yeah, feel free and unmute. And if you want to throw in the chat because maybe you're at front desk or anything like that, I'm more than happy to read it. I see Dan is giving a compliment. Great insights and techniques. Thank you.
Thank you.
We made them share so much. Nobody has anything else left.
That's okay. I will tell you that I thought I was the most popular person ever over the past hour because I didn't realize that every Padlet submission was going into an email notification. So I have like 112 email notices right now. And I was like, oh, wow, what happened? But it's all good things. So thank you all for your participation. That's awesome.
Getting lots of comments, lots of positive feedback.
Seen that.
You know, I'll spin off a question if no one's got one. So you mentioned like decision counseling, and I love that term. I feel like I've done that in the past, but I'd love to hear more about the differences between when you're providing that counseling to help someone make a decision and when someone's providing that kind of counseling and they have a clear idea as to what they want you to do.
Oh, yeah. I think that's like a great question. So you're thinking about like when someone's leadership style maybe is to kind of ask those types of questions, but they already know where they want to lead you. Is that what you're saying? Yeah. Right. So I think again, like this comes back to that as a leader, you have to recognize your role and step back from trying to like, be that like takeover. And you need to employ that active listening, and you need to really create that space to, just because you may have led somebody through or supported somebody through a similar crisis in the past doesn't mean that this person is going to need the same things, that they're experiencing the same things. And so when we are like putting that individual first, you have to and this is such a great question for me, because I think I could see myself falling into that pit, right? Like where I'm gonna feel like I know what we're gonna come to as a conclusion. And so, that is where, and I almost feel like that's where, if you know that you're that type of person, you can even talk it over with someone else ahead of time a little bit to say, I'm going to be having this conversation, and just kind of getting that support from someone in your network to remind you of like how you're going to approach that conversation and what you're going to do and what your goals are, so that you're not actually coming into it with a lot of assumptions and a personal like bias for a certain direction or plan of action.
Yeah, I think I always have to work on the active listening. And even there's a rule in my office. I tell people every time, if I'm not looking at you, I'm not listening to you, because I'm sitting at my desk. But I think it's all tied together. If you are providing an inclusive environment and trust is being built, I think that's so important for the leader to be trusted, because do they have the comfortableness to come to you and say, look, I know you're asking, but you're not really asking. You're telling me what I have to do. To be able to take that criticism or that input as feedback in a comfortable space too. I don't think we talked about a ton today, but it's always, to me, the context of power. And, is the leader sharing the power? Are they listening? You did talk a lot about being inclusive, but not everybody ties that to a power context.
Yep.
And then a lot about the institutional power versus the individual power, and who should take on those burdens.
Those are great points, Steve. Yeah, it's such a big issue. And I think, again, part of what I was, hopefully you're kind of taking from some of this too, is that if you practice these things in smaller and less, critical ways, and you just make it more routine for yourself, where as a leader, it'll be more like of an instinct to go that way. Then like when you get to the crises, then it should feel a little bit more natural. And I think that idea of trust and trust around power is really important. And if you can do that in the day-to-day before you get to a point where that's much more critical to have that trust in place. So.
Sure.
And one real quick, I know we're at time, but we received really good feedback from somebody when we presented last time, that just reminded us that whether you're a leader that's giving, some type of feedback, or that ear, or your colleague to colleague, like as the receiver of that information, it might be heavy as you're receiving it. So like, it doesn't necessarily merit an immediate response. Like, you are allowed to say, I have heard you. I just need, can I get back to you by the end of the day? Like, if you don't do that, if you don't take that personal check-in with yourself as you're receiving the information, you jeopardize giving good feedback and being a good ally to that person, because you're not in the right set of mind to respond accordingly or appropriately. And so I just want us to remember, again, whether you're a current leader or a future leader, colleague to colleague, like, you are allowed to take a pause yourself before you just immediately respond. So I think that's important.
For sure. I always have to think on things.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you just got to make sure that you don't forget, because once you don't circle back, then you've lost that trust.
Yeah.
So I know we're at time, but I know this is also a really good conversation. If people have to drop off, that's fine. If anyone wants to ask a question, though, feel free, and want to make sure that everyone gets their questions heard.
And feel free to reach out. We provided our emails on the slide, but yeah, feel free to reach out to us individually too, if there's something that you want to talk about more.
A personal note of thanks to Matt and Katrina. When I saw that they had done a similar presentation months ago, I said, please come speak to us. And a big thank you for the context you're providing. I think that's such an important framework that we can consider employing in each of our individual workspaces.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Steve.
And thank you, DJ. One of the best moderators ever. calmest voice, calmest demeanor ever. It's DJ, so thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, bye, everybody. I hope you have a really great day.
Thanks, everybody. See you down the road.